So I find in university, and this is the experience for a lot of people, even if you do spend most of your time studying and doing homework and stuff, just kind of the nature of how irregular your schedule is, that you're surrounded by people with similar interests around the same age as you, and just how there can kind of often be like parts of the semester where just not a lot going on, and there's times in between semesters where people just have a lot of spare time. This is assuming you're not working, and in Canada, it's more the norm, I guess, in the U.S. to not work when you go to school, just because university is a lot less expensive here. But I got through a whole bunch of series I wouldn't have normally watched, just because I had friends who were interested in them, like Avatar: The Last Airbender, Teen Titans, and Mystery Science Theater 3000. And I watched most of the episodes. Some of the movies I didn't watch, like the kaiju ones, just because I wasn't really interested in those. But the first episode I was shown by my friend who was a big fan of it was Manos: The Hands of Fate. And I think if people think of Mystery Science Theater 3000, it's probably either Manos: The Hands of Fate or maybe Monster A Go Go or Space Mutiny. But this is really what put this film on the map. So there's a lot of lore and myths surrounding Manos: The Hands of Fate. From my understanding, there was like a fertilizer salesman in Texas who was like crazy and wanted to make a movie, and he just got random people from the town to be in his movie. And it's shot in a really bizarre way. The video just is really washed out. The camera angles are very strange. The script is bizarre. The actors just speak in a very stilted fashion, and they often repeat lines. Like probably the most notable one is Torgo's like, "You have to get out of here. It'll be dark soon. You have to get out of here. It'll be dark soon." And just like in particular, the guy who played Torgo was obviously just super absurdly high when he was doing it, and it's just kind of fascinating. And it made a really good movie for them to make fun of because of just how strange it was. And a lot of people call Manos: The Hands of Fate the worst movie ever made. And I'm going to have to actually disagree on it. Manos is complete like amateur hour. It's awful. But it's a bit like when people say Ed Wood films are the worst movies ever made. Because Serp and I were watching Ed Wood because it's one of his favorite movies, and it kind of inspired me to go and watch some of Ed Wood's movies. And his movies honestly aren't even that bad. I mean, they're bad, but they're watchable, and I can follow them. And they are so bad it's good. But like, they're not completely like incompetently made, because there's like some stuff I've seen, like art movies or even like mainstream stuff, that's so incoherently produced. Like I thought Vice, for instance, was incoherent. Like I could barely follow Vice and just some other like mainstream movies. But Ed Wood was like watchable. It was enjoyable. And Manos is interesting because it kind of succeeds at as a horror movie, in my opinion, because of how badly made it was. So you do get this maybe unintentional, maybe intentional sense of it has this surreal, dreamlike quality to it, which is good for a horror movie. Because like the thing is, they're supposed to kind of be in the middle of nowhere, almost kind of like in another dimension. Okay, so for those of you who don't know what the plot of Manos is, very briefly, there's a couple with a daughter who are going on vacation, and they get lost, and they somehow get to a the Valley Lodge, which, according to the police officers, doesn't exist. So they kind of get stuck in another dimension or something. It's not very well established. And once they get there, they meet Torgo, who's this really creepy, weird guy. And he keeps talking about the Master. So there's like a satanic cult that worships Manos, the Lord of Primal Darkness. And the Master's like this guy who looks like Freddie Mercury and has this cloak that has like these big hands on it. I think the irony is Manos, to my understanding, means hands in um, Spanish, so it's literally hands, the hands of fate. And ultimately, like Torgo gets killed. The wife of the mother gets taken in as one of his wives, and Debbie gets taken in. The little girl is one of the future wives, and the husband replaces Torgo as the master's groundskeeper. So that's kind of the plot, and the idea is the Valley Lodge is supposed to kind of be in an alternate dimension or something. And just because of the way it's shot, like how weird it is, where they're just kind of driving along at the beginning, and there's strange camera angles, and it's like it's all washed out, and they're driving through what looks like a neighborhood or something that is completely like empty, and like the scenery keeps changing, and I think it changes from like day to night, and they just put filters over it, and it actually does kind of look like they're going into another dimension. It does look like they've entered like the zone or area X, or or something like the Endless. And it's coupled with what I actually think is a pretty damn good soundtrack. I think Manos actually has a really good soundtrack. The main song, Forgetting You, I think is legitimately eerie, especially since it very much has that old. I can't play the song or I'll get a copyright strike, but it has that very old like record player, and it kind of makes you think of like a Lovecraft story or some other kind of old horror story, where like they're looking for evidence and they're going through the office and they find a strange record and they put it on and it's playing like this really somewhat garbled, kind of strange sounding thing, but that makes it scarier. So I think that works, and just the strangeness of the filming actually makes it kind of eerie, and the acting also kind of works in a weird way, because once again, this is a horror movie. This is supposed to be like disturbing and unsettling. So like the people repeating lines, the stuff that just doesn't really make any sense, the really poor set design actually kind of makes it scarier, because once again, it makes it look more like they're in another dimension or something, and just like the cuts and stuff. So it's kind of interesting because it's so poorly made and they screwed up so much when they were making it, that it kind of works as a horror movie. And the other thing is, the wife is really good looking. I think she went on to be a model actually, but she's a very attractive woman, so that helps the film. And most of Manos's wives are at least somewhat attractive. So you have good music, bizarre acting, a surreal script, some of the most, I guess you could call it creative. It's kind of like it's so incompetent it was creative camera work, and like hot women. It's like, okay, so it's not that bad. I mean, it's really bad, but it's like watchable. It doesn't like harm me to watch it. And this brings us to Manos Returns. If you're looking at this god awful like uh, like wallpaper, you're like, Argent, you boomer, how could you like screw it up so bad, the aspect ratio? Well, this is from their website. This is the aspect ratio they put on their website. This is literally what it looks like. And let that kind of be a just sign about how bad this movie is. Because this movie is way worse than the original. Like, this might be in the top 5 worst movies I've ever seen. The worst movie I've ever seen is, and probably always will be, The Hip Hop Witch, which is so bad I can't even really do a review of it. It's. Oh. Anyways, though, but this is up there. And this just kind of takes like the worst aspects of like an asylum movie, with the worst aspects of like some sort of social justice warrior thing, with the worst aspects of the original. And it kind of like, I get that it's always going to be cringe if you're remaking like a cult classic. Like if you're kind of trying to recapture the lightning in the bottle, as Red Letter Media put it with Ghostbusters. But I mean, there's like remakes that like work, or remake kind of reboots, like Blade Runner 2049, which I have a huge poster of up on my wall. That was really good. There's like other stuff that works as like a reboot. But this is god awful. This is one of the worst films I've ever seen. So, like, why is it so bad? Okay, so it roughly kind of follows the plot of the original, where you have four teenagers who are looking for like the Valley Lodge, or looking for some hotel they booked on Expedia, and they're trying to get out of the city because one of them like needs a vacation. And like, I never thought I'd be complaining about affirmative action in a Manos sequel, but they just kind of like shove a bunch of diversity in it, like to just try to be obnoxious. I don't know why exactly. And like, one of the main characters is a lesbian for some reason. And like, all the characters aren't even like, they're hideous. Like, I don't know if they had affirmative action for like the most obese, like ugly women they could find, but like there's like some redhead main girl and she's like obese, and then Manos's wives are all like hideous and obese, and it's just like, if there's nothing to look at in this movie. Like, we had Diane in the original and she's a gorgeous woman. And this is a horror movie, and people say, "Well, Argent, like, why you incel? Why are you complaining about ugly women in movies?" Because that's the point of horror movies. Part of the point of horror movies is they're low budget, and they just hire like random hot women to be in them, and that's like half of the reason you watch a horror movie. And it's why it's always tolerable. Like, horror movies to me are almost always tolerable because the music's normally good, it's normally visually interesting, and if that all fails, there's normally hot women to look at. And that at least gives you something to look at. And in this case, you don't have any of that. So they just inserted a bunch of like random diversity for no reason into this, I guess, to try to make it progressive. And maybe it's kind of an FU to the original. And all the women are just land whales. And it's just like, I don't want to see that in a film. I'm sorry. Call me shallow. But that's number one. Other than that, though, it's really cringy because it's kind of one of those awkward semi sequels, semi remakes where they just rely so much on the original. Like, there's so many times in this movie where they like make references to the original, and because this is like some sort of hipster movie or whatever, they're always so smug. There's just this like smugness in anything hipsters do, where they're just like, I'm so much smarter than you. I'm into this like scene alt stuff, like this stuff that like no one else knows about, and I'm so cool. And it comes across that way. And like, there's just a lot of scenes that are just kind of obvious homages to the original, but it kind of feels to me like the people who made this, ironically, it was made by like the girl from the original, and the master kind of showed up in it again. It kind of feels like the people who made this didn't really care about the original, or didn't really care, like it was just kind of like a really lame money grab. But it even failed as a money grab because it just, it doesn't feel like anyone gave a shit when they made this movie. It just felt like, we're smarter than you because we're making reference to this shitty movie that like has a cult following. It's not something like The Disaster Artist. Like, The Disaster Artist is making fun of Tommy Wiseau, but it's also kind of celebrating him, and it's kind of, it's showing both positive and negative features about him. And it's supposed to be more of kind of like a big sloppy love letter to people who like the room and are fans of it. But this is just kind of like, I don't even know. So they just have a lot of scenes where people repeat stuff. They get some actor to play Torgo who doesn't look like Torgo, who doesn't act like Torgo. They have like this lame Torgo in love plot. The master just like doesn't really show up. There's just like random cuts to him. There's like a new master who I think is Debbie, and then Diane is still around for some reason, and she just sits in a chair and brushes her hair. And they have like all the same like plot elements. Like, for some reason they leave they try to walk like back to the road, but they don't manage to walk back to the road. They go in circles just like the original. And it's hard for me even to describe how bad this movie is. I would not recommend like watching this film even as like a joke, even to just out of curiosity. I have Amazon Prime, so I just watched it because I was curious and it popped up as like under the recommended. And as I said, this is one of the top 5 worst movies I've ever seen, maybe. And by that I mean, well, it's kind of hard because like is it really fair to take like something like Monster a Go Go or like just some random horror movie from like the 1950s or 1940s that was mass produced that no one even like knew about? I don't know, but if it is okay, then this movie might not be there, but it's really bad. It doesn't have any of the kind of like the charm or the humor involved with this. It's just like a god awful like hipster wet dream. So that's the review. I hope you enjoyed it. I definitely recommend watching the original Manos with the Mystery Science Theater 3000 commentary. Actually, the skits in that episode are amazing. This like the actual show like outside of the movie, I think was one of the funniest. And I think they actually had a couple really funny shorts in that. I think that was the sales one. So that was one of the best episodes. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed the review, and I'll talk to you guys soon.